There comes a time when humanity is faced with weather disasters and global wars that are slowly destroying people. And technology emerges that people use not to save an uncertain tomorrow, but to return to the bright memories and emotions of yesterday. Nick Bannister goes to work, where he is met by his assistant Emily Sanders, nicknamed Watts, who informs him that a fellow soldier is waiting for him. The man lost both legs in the recent global war and comes to Nick to take advantage of technology that allows him to return to a bright past left only in his memories. After all, few people dream of the future now because cities have flooded and wars have engulfed the world. The tank was originally a tool for interrogation and then became a means to relive the best moments of life all over again. Nick immerses the man in a time when he was healthy and cheerful, playing with his dog on the lawn of his father's house. When he comes to his senses, the man tries to pay Watts off with a new synthetic substance, Baka, but Nick provides his co-worker his services for free because their establishment is a success. Who wouldn't want to visit the past and see their dear and close people and relive the best moments of life? But there are those who abuse the memories. One such person is Elsa, who comes almost daily to relive a night of love with a dear one. But one day, a woman comes into the establishment who has lost her keys on her way home. The woman introduces herself as May and immediately attracts Nick's attention. She is immersed in her memories, and Nick looks at the customer's day. The wake-up call, breakfast, and the keys May puts in her bag. She drives to work, to the club, and drops her keys under the makeup table. Watts wants to stop the memories, but for some reason Nick asks her to keep going. He sees a woman crying before going on stage, but picks himself up and goes to the microphone. He listens mesmerized to her voice, then turns off the equipment. After she leaves, Watts discovers May's forgotten earrings and gives them to Nick. As the sun rises, flooded Miami turns into a ghost town. It is so hot during the day that people have begun to live at night. The fighting at the borders ended long ago, but passions still boil inside the cities, and riots occur more and more often. And prosecutors often turn to Nick for help because his equipment can be used to peer into the moments of crime. Today's client is a tycoon accused of starting a fire in one of the buildings, and his lawyers are seeking a ban on a cession of capacity. And the prosecutor's office can do nothing, even though the city is mired in problems, murders, and corruption. During the war, such tycoons bought up dry land for next to nothing, and the settlers had to survive as best as they could. The day would come when the ocean would take everything, but for now, the flooded city could still be home. Nick comes to the club and finds May. He gives her the earrings and asks her why she cried before the show. The woman confesses that she always gets nervous before she goes on stage, and offers to walk her out. A close relationship develops between May and Nick, but one day the woman disappears without a trace. Watts worries about her partner, who begins to constantly delve into his memories to figure out where and how to find May. The colleague tries to get the man to come back to his life. As their business begins to crack at the seams, new technology is emerging, clients are leaving. Even Elsa has disappeared somewhere and doesn't come for weeks, and he spends every day in the tank remembering May. He tries to forget her, but she won't come out of his mind. One day, he remembers sharing with her his terrible memories of people dying in the surging waves, and she sympathized and understood him. He goes around places where he might have known something about May, but he gets the impression that the woman never existed. And the more truth he learns about his beloved, the more he doubts that he ever knew her at all. He goes back again and again to the time when they were together. Once he noticed bruises on her arm, but she excused herself by working hard in high heels. He told her about the war and the trenches, and only now knows what true happiness is. One day he is roused from his dive by someone's insistent knocking, but while he's getting out of the tank, there is no one at the front door. Suddenly he sees something shiny under the water and picks up May's earring. Watts can't believe that the woman lost the jewelry today. Apparently it's been lying under the door for a long time. And now they need to get busy, because they've been summoned to interrogate a dealer named Holes who worked for Joe, the biggest supplier of Baka. The criminal is submerged in the tank and finds himself in a barroom, in the middle of which stands the chair of the chief mafioso of Orleans, St. Joe. Suddenly, a familiar voice is heard, and Nick sees May. She sings for Joe, and he notices the woman. The events took place over 5 years ago, and despite Watts' objections, Nick asks to show the memories next. May is introduced to Joe, and he offers her baka. May refuses, which enrages Halls, but Joe offers to apologize to the woman, and Joe's underling aims a gun at him. He apologizes, and Joe treats May to baka again, and this time she agrees. At this moment, one of the police officers, losing his patience, pushes Nick away and asks Halls the main questions. But the bandit's brain shuts down, and the officers ask Nick to bring the criminal's mind back. Nick again asks to see May, and a scene emerges where the girl reminds him of what she once was, poor but clean and conscientious. But then she tried baka and lost herself. Halls has no time to listen to her outpourings because Joe is waiting for him with the goods. But it's not in the safe because May has robbed her master. The last thing Halls remembers is May hitting him over the head. Watts is astonished. Didn't Nick know that his beloved was using substances? But he never noticed this weakness of hers, but now he knows where to find her. Nick goes to New Orleans, tormented by the thought that he didn't know the woman he loved at all. He comes to Joe, but he is greeted with distrust because he reeks of the military from a mile away. And Joe was once the one who was left to die in the tide by the military. He gives an order to drown Nick in the fish tank until he tells him the real reason for his visit. Nick confesses that he is looking for May, but this causes the merchant to laugh. Is it all because of this woman? He knows what she took from him, substances and money, but what did she want with Nick? The conversation with the bandit might have ended badly if Watts hadn't come to the rescue. A first-rate marksman, she quickly incapacitated Joe's fighters, shooting the mobster's favorite aquarium in the process. Nick struggles with his jailer, and as he prepares to engage in a firefight, it turns out that Watts has already dealt with everyone and mortally wounded Joe. By the request of the wounded man, the woman finishes him off, and the pair leave. But now Nick agonizes over the question, why did May come to him? He recalls telling her about the plates on which memories were recorded, and May shared one of them. When London flooded, she swam to Miami. But she didn't have a place to stay, so she somehow fell asleep on the boat. Someone untied her, and the woman was swept out into the ocean. She would have died if she hadn't stumbled upon a lonely white house in the middle of the water, not far from Florida Keys. The woman who lived there put her back on her feet, and it was the best thing that ever happened to her. And Nick had the memory of a song his grandfather sang, and he sang it for May. Nick plunges back into his memories again and again to figure out what the con artist stole. Watts can't understand his obsession. What does he have that May went to imitate the relationship for? Watts recalls May's last visit. At the time, the woman offered her alcohol because she wanted to fix the relationship. She saw that she didn't like her colleague Nick and candidly admits that she was addicted. To this, Watts admits that she worked in supply after the war. She needed to feed her daughter, so she went to soldier drones for the army. The woman then abused and once caused a fire. Her daughter was taken away by the relatives and Watts went back to the bottle. But thanks to Nick, she didn't drown in it. Feeling bad, Watts went to the bathroom, leaving May alone in the room. And she took advantage of this and broke into the vault using the access code, Nick's grandfather's tune. And that means the woman has been studying it hard and has been preparing for a robbery for a long time. They look through their file cabinet and discover Elsa's memories are missing. Nick goes looking for the woman and learns from her friend that Elsa was murdered and her baby boy is missing without a trace. The red-headed friend who took the boy was with the killer. Nick is increasingly plagued by the question, who was May really? A con artist? An addict? A murderer? Nick checks all the clues that might lead to May, and one day he is attacked by a man who, after beating him, advises him to forget about May, as she did. Then he calls someone with the message that Nick won't bother them anymore. Watts manages to identify the attacker, a corrupt cop from Joe's entourage. They go to the prosecutor's office, but on the way they witness a disturbance. The land tycoon is dead, and the people who had hoped for relief learn that everything goes to the rich man's wife and son, and they have no intention of changing his policies. It turned out that Nick was acquainted with the rich man's wife, and seeing her reminded him of a clue that had long plagued his subconscious. The man from Elsa's memories was none other than the tycoon. And Watts finds data on the policeman named Booth who worked for the tycoon. Nick recognized him because the rich man's wife, Tamara, had once approached Nick as well, and then the rich man said the same words that Elsa had later said. It turns out that Rich wanted to get rid of the bastard child and hired Booth to do it, but it's going to be damn hard to prove. Nevertheless, Nick is determined to do it because May used him. He goes to visit the tycoon's widow, who, like other rich people, lived on property protected by a dam. Nick is greeted by the butler and, without letting him explain who he is, hands him the hat and jacket that all the men in the house wear. Puzzled, Nick walks into a room styled like the store where Tamara once met her fiancé. He realizes that Tamara has lost her mind and everything around her is rigged for her reality. Nevertheless, he tries to talk to her and asks her to tell him where Booth is. Then he opens the mirrors and the woman, seeing her reflection, comes to her senses for a moment. She knows that her husband ordered her to kill her former mistress and child because he did not want to share the inheritance. At this moment, Tamara's son arrives and Nick is thrown out, and he avoids death only because the butler was also ex-military. After remembering Tamara's reservation about human scum, Nick goes down to the old factory where those who have no place in society gather. Seeing a woman who looks like May, he follows her and finds Booth, who taunts him. He and May are people from another world and he will never find her. Booth jumps out the window and Nick runs after him. They meet on the roof and start a fight, but Booth jumps over to the next building. Nick repeats the trick and catches the bandit. They fight again until they end up in a flooded music room. And then Booth, along with the piano, falls through a hole in the floor and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Nick dives after him and frees him from the piano, but Booth hits him and Nick begins to sink while the bandit floats up. Nick sees May and hears her voice. Immediately he finds the strength and swims out to grab Booth, who was not expecting it. He plunges him into the tank, intending to find out the whole truth. He sees how Booth and May met in Miami. It was then that he hired the woman to find Elsa's memories. May met his army friend, and the latter, over Baca, spilled everything he knew about Nick. He even whistled his friend's favorite song. It turns out that the woman knew and had everything in mind. All this time, Nick was just a target. But in an instant flashback, he suddenly discovers that May was resisting her because she was genuinely attracted to Nick. That's when the bruise on her arm appeared. And after she brought Elsa's memory tapes, Booth confessed that he intended to get rid of the woman and her son. That's when Booth killed Elsa, but May managed to intercept the boy and put him on the boat. She rescued the child and escaped from the murderer. May then went to Nick's house, knocking on the door, but she was already waiting for Booth, who promised to kill Nick if she did not go with him. That's when May dropped the earring, hoping Nick would find it. In the next flashback, Booth tries to get May to confess where she took the baby, and she suddenly talks about the house amidst the ocean. Nick realizes that this is a message for him. He steps into the illusion, and May confesses her love for him while kissing Booth. Then, after pushing the bandit away, May swallows a handful of Baca and leaps from a height. Enraged, Nick retaliates against Booth in the most brutal way possible, by frying his brain with his most nightmarish memories of being burned alive on Joe's orders. Nick goes to the tycoon's house. He realizes who really killed Elsa. The rich man's son didn't want to share his inheritance, and he was the one who hired Booth. And Nick has all the proof. He was the one Booth called at the time, and it can be confirmed. The guy tries to pay him off, but Nick says his brother is alive, and the police have already found him in a cabin in the middle of the ocean, and they are coming for the killer soon. The guy pulls out a gun but hesitates to shoot and tries to kill himself, but he doesn't have the guts to do it either. Nick goes to Watts, who now works at the hospital, and confesses to killing Booth. He hands over the records of Elsa and May's murders and asks that it be given to the prosecutor's office. He regrets missing out on many good things and asks Watts to find her daughter and be with her. The news of the tycoon's son's crime was the last drop that overflowed the cup of people's patience, and a riot broke out in the town. But Nick withdrew from it all into memories, reliving again and again the happy moments of meeting May. Now elderly Watts and her granddaughter often come to his receptacle, while Nick tells May the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. The idea of the film makes us think that people are very different. Some deal with a bad present and an uncertain future and may not dwell on memories, while others need to constantly look back to the past in order to exist in the present.